Hello everyone, and welcome. I have a treat for you tonight. We have tonight a holiday special, a late night stroll through the stranger corners of history. If you found your way here, it's probably because your mind refuses to sleep. So, let's give it something quietly absurd to chew on. Where did Halloween come from? And why do we celebrate it? Do you know why? If not, you're going to find out why we do what we do and how it started. Before we dive too deeply, a gentle nudge. If you enjoy stories that let you relax and learn at the same time, consider liking this video and subscribing to History at Bedtime. Also, feel free to leave a comment sharing your location and local time. We like to see history travel the globe alongside our viewers. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. If you close your eyes right now, you might imagine Halloween as it looks today, a warm orange glow spilling from carved pumpkins, children in capes and ghost sheets running between doorsteps, and the faint smell of candy corn in the air. But rewind the world a few thousand years, and that same night looked very different. No costumes, no chocolate bars, just bonfires and fear. The people of Iron Age Europe, especially the Celts of what's now Ireland, believed that this time of year, late October, was a moment of unraveling, a crack between worlds. The harvest was done, the days were shortening, and death, ever so politely, was said to draw a little closer to the living. They called it Samhain, spelled Samhain, but pronounced softly, so-in. It was not so much a celebration as it was a negotiation, a quiet pact between mortals and the unseen. Bonfires were lit not for warmth, but for protection. Animals were brought inside, and doors were left slightly ajar for spirits who might visit. People would wear animal skins and masks, not for fun, but for safety. The disguise was meant to confuse wandering ghosts, to make the living blend with the dead. So yes, before the plastic skeletons, before the candy and cobweb decorations, Halloween was a night to fool death itself. You might imagine it as the ancient version of a neighborhood watch, only instead of worrying about burglars, people worried about souls. They believed that on this single night, the boundaries between the human world and the other world blurred, allowing spirits, fairies, and ancestors to walk freely. To honor their dead, people set out food and drink, like spiritual hospitality, a bit of milk by the door, a piece of bread on the table, offerings to keep the peace with whatever might cross the threshold. It was sacred. It was eerie, it was beautiful, and like all human rituals, it was rooted in something timeless, the fear of the unknown. Now, historians still debate whether the Celts viewed Samhain as a New Year festival. Some suggest it marked the boundary between life's light half and dark half, a calendar of survival in a harsh world. Others believe it was never about beginnings or endings at all, but about balance, because in the ancient mind, darkness wasn't evil. It was necessary, and perhaps that's the quiet truth hidden under every Halloween mask. We've always needed a night to look our fears in the eye and laugh softly back at them. Fast forward 1,000 years, Europe is now dotted with churches. The bonfires are smaller, the priests louder, By the 8th century, Christianity had swept through Celtic lands, and the old gods were considered dangerous ideas, too wild, too pagan, too beloved to die quietly. So the church did what it often did best. It adapted. Instead of banning Samhain outright, it tried to baptize it. Pope Gregory III declared All Saints' Day on November 1st, a day to honor holy figures, saints and martyrs, who had officially earned their place in heaven. And the night before, October 31st, became known as All Hallows' Eve. Sound familiar? Over time, All Hallows' Eve became Halloween. Yes, Halloween itself began as the church's attempt to stop people from believing in ghosts. And, in one of history's great ironies, that attempt gave birth to the most ghost-filled night of all. All Saints' Day was soon followed by All Souls' Day, a quieter, humbler commemoration for everyday people who had died. In many villages, it became a fusion of old Celtic custom and new Christian faith. People still lit candles for the dead, but now those candles were blessed by priests. Food was still offered, but now the offerings were given to beggars or the poor, who went door to door asking for soul cakes. The poor would promise to pray for the giver's departed loved ones, and in return receive a small pastry marked with a cross. You can almost see it, can't you? The faint, early shape of trick-or-treating, a ghost of a tradition that would survive for 1,000 years. In England, this became known as souling. Children would walk the streets with lanterns carved from turnips. Yes, turnips, hollowed out and lit from within. It was only when Irish immigrants brought the tradition to America that the pumpkin, larger, warmer, easier to carve, stole the spotlight. And that's how a root vegetable became a cultural icon. By the Middle Ages, Halloween had turned into a patchwork of old and new. Church bells tolled for souls in purgatory. Villagers prayed, feasted, and whispered ghost stories beside the fire. The boundary between religion and superstition blurred, and that, perhaps, is what made it endure, because people didn't stop believing in spirits just because the church told them to. They simply gave those spirits new names. It's fascinating, isn't it, how a single autumn night became a tug of war between heaven and earth, between faith and fear. And in the quiet between those forces, Halloween evolved into something else entirely, a mirror of humanity itself, a ritual of remembrance, a carnival of darkness, a whisper that says, we know we must die, but tonight let's pretend we can outsmart it. By the late Middle Ages, something strange began to happen to Halloween. It was no longer just about saints or spirits, it was about mischief. Villagers, especially the young and the restless, started turning the night into something playful and a little dangerous. People wore masks not only to hide from ghosts, but to hide from each other. And what began as solemn rituals turned slowly into rowdy games of reversal. When servants mocked masters, beggars pretended to be nobles, and everyone pretended not to recognize their neighbors. Halloween became, in a way, society's annual permission slip for chaos. In Scotland and Ireland, the tradition of guising emerged Children and adults dressing up in strange costumes, knocking on doors and performing little songs, poems, or tricks in exchange for food. If the house refused to give, well, small pranks often followed. A missing date here, a soot-smeared window there. Nothing too serious, but enough to remind the living that spirits and teenagers could not be ignored. And behind the laughter, there was something deeper. People weren't just playing, they were confronting fear by wearing it. A skeleton mask, a witch's nose, a devil's grin. They turned terror into theater. It's a pattern you see across the centuries. When people fear something they can't control, they turn it into a game. And that's how fear becomes fun. By the 16th century, the church once again found itself outmaneuvered. The people were celebrating All Hallows Eve not with prayer, but with laughter, disguise, and fire. Bonfires still burned on the hillsides, symbolically chasing away the dark, though by then they were called Hallow Fires. Witches, black cats, and wandering souls began to appear in folk tales, each story blurring the line between morality and mischief. One popular belief said witches flew through the skies on broomsticks, attending midnight gatherings known as Sabbaths. Some even said the devil himself joined them, taking the shape of a black goat or a mysterious man with glowing eyes. Of course, historians still debate whether these witch meetings were ever real or merely imagined, the fevered invention of fear. But fear has always been a creative force. And so Halloween began its transformation into a carnival of contradictions. It was holy and heretical, light-hearted and lethal, spiritual and absurd. It reflected everything the human heart is, equal parts reverence and rebellion. You can almost picture it, a flickering village square, costumed revelers dancing under the autumn moon, monks frowning from the abbey steps, and somewhere in between, children laughing as they run through the smoke. A night caught between sin and celebration, a night that belonged to everyone and to no one. When the first waves of Irish and Scottish immigrants crossed the Atlantic in the 19th century, they carried Halloween with them, folded neatly inside songs, stories, and superstition. But America, as it often did, turned it into something entirely new. Here, Halloween found its second life. At first, it was modest, a harvest festival of sorts. Communities gathered for barn dances, apple bobbing, and ghost tales told under kerosene light. But as cities grew and industrial life took over, Halloween began to evolve again, this time as an escape. By the late 1800s, urban Americans were craving folklore, nostalgia, and mystery, something to balance the mechanical rhythm of modern life. Halloween provided just that. It was the one night the imagination could breathe. Early 20th century newspapers are filled with charming and slightly chaotic stories. Teenagers tipping over outhouses, stringing ropes across roads, and scaring horses with carved turnips lit from within. It was fun until it wasn't. By the 1920s, Halloween mischief had become a national headache. Police departments called it an epidemic of pranks, broken windows, vandalism, and stolen gates became common enough that cities began searching for a solution. That solution, candy. civic groups, schools, and eventually candy companies promoted a new idea: trick or treat, a friendly alternative to destruction. Instead of causing chaos, children could earn treats through harmless visits and costumes. It was a social experiment that worked beautifully. By the 1950s, the post-war suburbs of America turned Halloween into what we recognize today: a calm, glowing, family-friendly ritual. Neighborhoods buzzed with costume children, porches glowed with jack-o'-lanterns, and candy became currency. It was no longer about spirits or saints. It was about sweetness, community, and the gentle thrill of the night. And yet, something ancient still lingers beneath it all. Every costume, every carved pumpkin, every candle flickering inside a grinning face, all of it traces back to Samhain's fires. When we dress as ghosts, we echo the Celts hiding from their dead. When we light pumpkins, we mimic ancient offerings to the gods. When we laugh in the dark, we whisper to our fears that we are not afraid. Even now, in our modern world of LED lights and store-bought cobwebs, Halloween remains a living paradox, a night of death that celebrates life, a night of darkness that glows brighter than any other. And so, the story of Halloween is not just a history of masks and candy. It's a story of how humans, for thousands of years, have learned to dance with what they fear, to face death, not with dread, but with delight, to remember the ones who came before, and to laugh in the flickering light between worlds. If Halloween had a king, he would not wear a crown, but a crooked grin carved from orange flesh, lit from within by a single trembling flame. The jack-o'-lantern, glowing proudly on porches and windowsills each October, is one of the most beloved symbols of the modern world's oldest fears. But its story, like so many things about Halloween, is far older and darker than most realize. Long before pumpkins, there was a man called Stingy Jack. According to old Irish folklore, Jack was a clever drunk, a man too fond of trickery, too wary of consequence, and far too clever for his own soul. One night, as the tale goes, Jack invited the devil himself for a drink. When it came time to pay, Jack convinced the devil to turn into a coin, but instead of spending it, he pocketed the coin beside a small silver cross, trapping the devil inside. Jack freed him only on one condition: that the devil would never claim his soul. The devil agreed, though perhaps with a smile. Years later, when Jack finally died, he found heaven unwilling to open its gates, and hell bound by its bargain. So he was left to wander the earth with only a hollowed out turnip and a burning coal to light his way. And thus Jack of the Lantern was born. In time, his story became a warning, a restless spirit between worlds, forever paying the price of his cleverness. When the Irish celebrated Samhain, they carved grotesque faces into turnips and beets, placing candles inside to ward off Jack and other lost souls. When immigrants brought the custom to America, they found a new fruit for their lanterns: the pumpkin, bright, soft, and perfectly round, as if made for light and legend. That single act of substitution transformed the holiday. The pumpkin became not just decoration, but symbol, a flickering reminder that even in darkness, we can make beauty glow. Historians say the first recorded American jack-o'-lanterns appeared in the early 1800s, often carved for harvest celebrations rather than Halloween. But it didn't take long for the two to merge. By the late 19th century, newspapers were publishing guides on how to carve your own pumpkin demon for the October festivities. Children began competing to make the strangest faces, and soon every window held one, a smile between life and death. But what makes this tradition truly haunting is its endurance. Over 1,000 years, through migration, religion, technology, and empire, the idea never faded. Somewhere deep in our shared memory, we still feel comfort in lighting a candle against the dark. The jack-o'-lantern may grin with mischief, but behind its smile lies something eternal, a human whisper saying, "I will not fear the night." There's a strange thing about fear. We run from it, and then we go looking for it. Every October, people fill haunted houses, watch horror films, and walk willingly into the shadows that their ancestors once fled from. Why? Why does terror feel comforting? Psychologists have a term for it, canine masochism. It's the pleasure we find in controlled discomfort, the same reason people ride roller coasters or eat food so spicy it makes them cry. When we're scared but safe, the brain releases dopamine, the same chemical that triggers joy and anticipation. Our bodies prepare for danger, then reward us when that danger doesn't come. It's the biological equivalent of standing on a cliff and stepping back just before the fall. But this is not new. Ancient people understood this instinct long before science did. Every culture, from Mesopotamia to Japan, told ghost stories not only to explain death, but to make peace with it. Fear, in a strange way, was medicine. It gave shape to the unknown, turning chaos into story. The Celts believed the dead returned each autumn night, but if you welcomed them with light and laughter, they would not harm you. The medieval church told tales of purgatory, so believers could imagine and survive the terror of eternity. And even today, we light candles, watch scary movies, and whisper about what we can't explain. It's the same ritual, just dressed in new clothes. Some anthropologists suggest fear has a social purpose. When people gather around a story, a ghost tale, a myth, a bedtime legend, their heart rates sink, their breathing slows together. They bond through the shared thrill of danger, safely escape. In other words, Halloween may not just be a night of fear, it may be a night of connection, a night that reminds us that fear, like fire, can warm us if we keep it at the right distance. Modern science even echoes this ancient wisdom. Brain scans show that when people experience pleasant fear, their neural activity resembles meditation. Their focus narrows. The noise of the world fades. It's as if, in fear, we return to the stillness of our ancestors, listening for the sound in the dark, hearts steady beneath the stars. Maybe that's why, at its core, Halloween isn't about horror at all. It's about balance, a night where we face what frightens us and leave a candle in the window, not to chase the dark away, but to invite it in just for a while. And as you drift deeper tonight, remember the ghosts you fear are often memories, and the masks we wear are only mirrors. Halloween, at its heart, is not a celebration of death, but of life's fragile, flickering beauty. The light inside the pumpkin burns for a reason. It's not to scare the dark, it's to remind it we're still here. Every October, millions of people put on masks. Some hide behind glitter and paint, others behind horror and laughter. And for one night, the rules of who we are and who we're allowed to be quietly unravel. It feels harmless, doesn't it? Children as monsters, adults as superheroes. But beneath the fun lies something older, something profoundly human. To wear a mask is to hold power. Anthropologists trace the use of masks back tens of thousands of years. In Paleolithic caves, figures were carved half human, half animal, perhaps hunters invoking the spirit of prey, perhaps shamans stepping between worlds. Masks were never just decorations, they were tools of transformation. To become something else, if only for a moment, was to step into myth, and that, in its quiet way, is what Halloween still allows us to do. In medieval Europe, the idea of disguise carried both danger and liberation. During festivals like Samhain, or later mumming plays, peasants wore rags and animal skins, parading through towns as guisers, mocking the rich, taunting authority, inverting the social order. For one night, the powerless became powerful, the jester became king, the unseen seen. It was rebellion in laughter's clothing, and it frightened the authorities because it reminded them how fragile their masks of control really were. When you put on a mask, you are no longer just yourself. You are story, archetype, emotion. The ghost, loss. The witch, rebellion. The vampire, hunger. The angel, hope. In every disguise, some part of us reaches out to explore what we're not allowed to be by day. And maybe that's the secret reason Halloween feels so freeing. It's not about pretending, it's about remembering that we are all more than one thing. Psychologists call it temporary identity release. During moments of costume and performance, the brain loosens its social filters. It stops guarding the self so tightly. You laugh louder, you move differently, you remember what it feels like to be unobserved, or at least unjudged. In a world obsessed with labels and categories, Halloween quietly whispers, you don't have to pick one. And when the night ends, when the masks come off and the makeup smudges, something subtle lingers, a sense of softness, because for just a few hours, we got to meet the versions of ourselves we never let out. Maybe that's why, even as adults, we still love to dress up. Not because we want to escape who we are, but because we want to meet who we might be. If the mask lets us become fear, then the haunted house lets us walk through it. There's something oddly comforting about stepping into darkness we paid for. We line up outside, knowing we'll scream, but also that we'll leave safe, laughing, alive. It's a ritual of survival, disguised as recreation, and it's not as new as you might think. The first recorded haunted attractions appeared in Victorian England. Ghost shows, seances, and phantasmagoria light exhibitions thrilled audiences with magic lanterns. Early projections of spectres that floated across smoke-filled rooms. People gasped, crossed themselves, and begged for more. Fear, once a curse, had become a commodity. By the 19th century, ghost stories were a respectable form of entertainment. Writers like Charles Dickens and M.R. James turned the supernatural into literature, using the ghost not just to frighten, but to remind. Every haunting, after all, is about what refuses to be forgotten. In America, the haunted house evolved into something more physical and more playful. During the Great Depression, when young people's Halloween pranks became destructive, community groups built haunted walkthroughs to keep them occupied. Dark basements filled with homemade cobwebs, old sheets, and jump scares became the new safe chaos. By the 1960s, Disneyland's Haunted Mansion made the concept global, an elegant marriage of gothic atmosphere and gentle comedy, a place where death smiled politely and the afterlife danced to organ music. It was fear, softened by wonder, just enough dread to feel alive, just enough beauty to feel safe. Today, haunted houses are billion-dollar industries. Hollywood designs them, psychologists study them, and every October, millions enter willingly into darkness. We crave the pulse, the moment when heartbeats quicken, the relief when light returns. Why? Because it reminds us that fear doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it purifies. In a strange way, haunted houses are the spiritual descendants of ancient temples. Both invite us to cross thresholds, to confront mystery, to feel awe, to glimpse the invisible. The only difference is the soundtrack, but perhaps the most haunting part isn't what jumps out from the shadows. It's what lingers when we leave. The echo of laughter, the flicker of memory, the quiet realization that life itself is a kind of haunted house. We walk through its corridors, knowing it will end, yet marveling at every creak, every flicker of light, every breath that still carries warmth. That's what Halloween teaches, that the things which frighten us can also awaken us. That to face the dark is to remember the value of light. Every culture on earth tells stories about ghosts, different languages, different rituals, same instinct, that whispering certainty that something, someone, still lingers after the final breath. The oldest ghost stories ever written come from the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia, 4,000 years ago. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero calls upon the spirit of his dead friend, who appears not in wrath, but in sorrow. Even then, people believed the dead could still feel, still hunger, still remember. And if the dead remembered the living, then surely the living owed them the same. Across the world, the boundaries between life and death have never been simple walls, more like windows, thin, shifting, sometimes open when we least expect. In ancient Egypt, people spoke to the dead through letters carved on pottery shards, asking for help, forgiveness, or even advice. A woman might write to her late husband, "I am sick. Have you left me no protection? It wasn't superstition, it was conversation. In China, during the Hungry Ghost Festival, families still set out rice, fruit, and wine for wandering ancestors, burning paper money and clothes so that the dead might live comfortably in the next world. In Japan, the spirits are gentler, less frightening than nostalgic. Every August, during Obon, lanterns float down rivers to guide the souls home. The living dance, not in mourning, but in reunion. And in Mexico, the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, glows brightest of all. Altars covered in marigolds, candles, photos, favorite foods. It's not about fear. It's about remembering so completely that memory itself becomes resurrection. We might call them ghosts. Others call them ancestors, shades, echoes, or simply family. But whatever the name, the meaning is the same. Love does not stop at the grave, and maybe that's the truest ghost story of all. In medieval Europe, however, ghosts grew less comforting. Christian theology divided the afterlife into strict borders: heaven, hell, and that uncomfortable waiting room called purgatory. Ghosts, then, were seen as souls who hadn't finished their business, the guilty, the restless, the wronged. But even in that fear, there was longing. To believe in ghosts was to believe that death was not the end, that something, somehow, continues. You can still hear the echo of that longing in Halloween itself. The candles, the costumes, the laughter, they all speak to a single ancient truth. We want the dead to visit, and we want them to find us happy. Every October, when we hang paper ghosts or light flickering candles inside pumpkins, we're continuing that ritual of invitation, a quiet nod to those who came before, a promise that they are not forgotten, and maybe, in some way, that promise is what keeps them near. There's something about autumn that changes how we dream. The nights grow longer, the air cools and thickens, the world seems to exhale, and suddenly our sleep feels different, deeper, older. It's not just imagination, there's science beneath the poetry. As daylight shortens, the human body produces more melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep. We fall asleep faster, we drift further, and as we spend more time in the dark, our dreams grow vivid, sometimes strange, as if they too sense the boundary thinning. But the ancients didn't need neuroscience to know that. They could feel it. For the Celts, late autumn, Samhain, was called a thin time, a moment when the veil between worlds stretched so fine you could almost see through it. They believed dreams in those nights carried messages from the gods, the dead, or even from parts of the self that only woke when the world slept. In monasteries, medieval monks wrote of dream vigils, nights spent in prayerful half-sleep, hoping for visions or warnings. They treated dreams not as random nonsense, but as windows opened by the divine. Even the Greeks built temples for dreaming, Ars Kirpia, where pilgrims slept to be healed by the god of medicine. They called it incubation sleep, a rest so deep it bordered on revelation. Maybe, in some way, Halloween, with its quiet nights and flickering lights, reminds us of those ancient sanctuaries We may not call it magic anymore, but something in us still listens to the dark like it's speaking. There's a reason people dream more of their ancestors in autumn, a reason old memories rise with the mist. It's the season of thresholds, where endings and beginnings blur, and time itself feels like it's nodding off beside us. Modern sleep researchers have discovered that temperature and light play quiet roles in our emotional rest. When nights cool and dawn comes later, our bodies naturally sink into longer cycles of REM sleep, the stage where dreams unfold like theatre. And what we dream about often mirrors what the world looks like outside. As trees shed leaves, our minds too begin to release what they no longer need. Dreams become the psyche's autumn, a letting go, a composting of the soul. So maybe that's the secret thread tying Halloween, sleep, and spirit together. They all ask the same thing of us: to surrender, to trust the dark not as an enemy, but as a guide. When you sleep this time of year, you're joining a ritual older than words. The earth is resting, the sun is pulling back, and you, a small flicker of consciousness, are part of that great exhale. Soft flute melody fades in, the sound of distant thunder rolling low. Halloween was never truly about fear. It was about rhythm, about remembering that death and sleep are not opposites, but siblings. Both are forms of return. Both remind us that to close our eyes is not to end, but to drift into something wider. So if your dreams feel strange this time of year, if you wake at 3 a.m. to the sound of rain or wind, don't be afraid. You're not being haunted. You're simply in season. There was a time when no one went to sleep on Halloween without a ritual. Every candle, every ember, every whisper had meaning. For the people who lived closest to the dark, superstition wasn't silly. It was survival. To them, the night of October 31st wasn't just another date. It was a crossing, a door that swung open between the living and the dead, between the world we see and the one we only sense. So they prepared, carefully, quietly. In old Celtic villages, when the fires of Samhain burned low, families would let the hearth go dark, the only time of year they dared. At dawn, they relit it from the sacred communal bonfire, carrying the flame home in clay pots or carved out turnips. It was more than fire. It was protection, a fragment of the sun reborn after its death. They called it the need fire, and every family who carried it believed they were carrying safety through the winter. But the rituals didn't stop there. If you wanted to stay safe from wandering spirits, you had options, and some were surprisingly practical. You could leave out a plate of food for the dead. Hospitality, after all, was powerful magic, even for ghosts. You could hang rowan berries by the door, or scatter iron nails across the threshold. Ghosts, it was said, disliked iron. Some thought it reminded them of their chains. And if you heard footsteps behind you after dark, you must never turn around. To look was to invite what followed. Better to keep walking, whisper a prayer, and pretend you hadn't noticed. In Ireland and Scotland, the night before All Saints' Day became known as Nutcrack Night. Young lovers roasted hazelnuts by the fire to see which ones popped or burned together, a rustic form of fortune telling. If your nut burned quietly beside your sweetheart's, your love was fated to last. If it leapt apart or hissed, well, best not to make wedding plans too soon. Some would peel apples in a single long strip and toss the peel over their shoulder, hoping it would land in the shape of their future lover's initials. And yes, people took this very seriously, because in a world lit only by fire, the smallest sign could feel like a message from fate. Not all Halloween superstitions were gentle though. Many were meant to outwit darker forces. You might wear your clothes inside out. You might walk backward before bed. You might draw a protective circle in chalk, or carry salt in your pocket, a pinch of purity to keep shadows away. And if all else failed, you could simply stay up all night, because everyone knew the dead preferred sleepers. Historians debate how much of this was belief and how much was habit, but perhaps that's missing the point. Superstition, at its heart, is humanity's quiet poetry, a way of speaking to what we can't control. We might laugh at old charms and omens, but haven't we all checked if Mercury's in retrograde or made a wish at 11:11? The rituals have changed, but the impulse is eternal. We still want the universe to notice us. And maybe, in a strange way, Halloween endures because it gives us permission to admit what we secretly believe, that the world is still full of mystery, that every creak, every shadow, every chill breeze might be a whisper from something older than reason. The night protects those who respect it, and perhaps that's the oldest magic of all. When dawn broke after the long night of Samhain, people gathered around the last burning embers of the fires. They fed them with new wood and watched the smoke rise into the pale November sky. That smoke, they believed, carried prayers, messages to the souls still wandering between worlds. Even as Christianity spread across Europe, that belief refused to die. It transformed instead, blending with new theology to create something both sacred and familiar. Samhain became All Hallows Eve, and the next morning, All Saints' Day. Then, on November 2nd, came All Souls' Day, the Day of the Dead, when candles burned for every lost name. In medieval towns, the sight of hundreds of tiny flames glowing in windows was common. Families lit candles in hollow turnips, skulls, or clay cups, believing each one gave warmth to a soul in purgatory. Monks wrote prayers through the night, reading the names of the departed until sunrise. Villagers rang bells at church doors, the soul bells. Each toll was meant to comfort the dead, guiding them through their uncertain passage. In some regions, children went souling, knocking on doors and offering to pray for a family's ancestors. In exchange for food, small cakes sweetened with spice and fruit, soul cakes, round, golden, stamped with a cross. The more you gave, the more prayers your loved ones received. If that sounds familiar, it should. Souling is the ancestor of modern trick-or-treating. But there was more to those candles than charity. Fire itself carried divine weight. To early Christians, light symbolized resurrection. the triumph of the soul over death's shadow. To pagans, it was life's essence, the visible breath of the sun. To both, it was sacred. That's why, even today, we light candles when we mourn. Why cities hold vigils after tragedy. Why birthday candles, tiny descendants of Samhain flames, still mark the passing of years. Some part of us remembers. Even now, archaeologists find traces of ancient fire pits near burial grounds, ashes mingled with animal bones and broken pottery, offerings, they think, for the comfort of those beyond, as if the dead, too, might feel cold. And in a way, isn't that the most human thought of all? That love could keep someone warm, even across the divide of death. Each November, as modern cities glow with electric light, somewhere a single candle still burns on a windowsill, a whisper of the old ways, a small, trembling sun. Maybe it's for someone specific, maybe it's for no one at all, but the meaning remains. You are not forgotten, and perhaps that's what the entire season, Samhain, All Souls, Halloween, has always been trying to say, that even as the nights grow longer, our memory burns brighter. That to remember is its own kind of resurrection. The church has always had an uneasy relationship with the night. Light was sacred, divine, but darkness, that belonged to mystery. And mystery, in the eyes of medieval clergy, was dangerous. So, when Christianity met the old Celtic festival of Samhain, a night when spirits crossed freely and bonfires roared against the dying year, it saw both a problem and an opportunity. The people loved their fires, they loved their masks, their feasts, their whispered prayers to the dead, and the church, wisely, knew it couldn't erase such a powerful ritual, so instead it baptized it. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III declared November 1st All Saints' Day, a holy day to honor the saints and martyrs of the church. And by the following century, All Souls' Day had been added, a gentler, more universal commemoration for all the faithful departed. But while the church sang hymns and lit candles, the villagers kept celebrating in their own way. They dressed as ghosts and devils, lit bonfires on hillsides, and carved faces into turnips to frighten wandering souls. The priests preached salvation, but the peasants still believed in spirits. And somewhere between them, Halloween or All Hallows' Eve took shape. There were sermons that warned against it. Clergy thundered that the dead did not walk, that witches were real but must be destroyed, that dancing in the fields on Halloween night was nothing less than consorting with demons. But people still danced. They still left bread and milk by the door for lost souls. They still whispered charms against the evil eye. To the ordinary believer, faith was not just doctrine, it was defense. They prayed to saints and burned herbs. They went to church on Sunday and hung rowan branches on Monday. They believed in both heaven and the hedge at the edge of the field, where the air felt different, where anything might appear. For centuries, the church tolerated this uneasy balance, but during the Reformation, that fragile peace broke. In Protestant Europe, reformers denounced Halloween's pagan remnants. They saw it as a relic of idolatry, the old world creeping through the cracks. And so, in some places, the fires went out. In others, they burned brighter in secret. The peasants celebrated quietly, behind barn doors and hedgerows, because they knew no decree could change the turning of the year. No sermon could silence the wind. Ironically, it was the church's own rituals that preserved Halloween. The readings, the bell tolls, the processions of candlelight. They gave structure to the chaos. They made space for remembrance. And, perhaps, deep down, the priests knew what the peasants did, that a world without mystery is a colder one. When we light a candle on Halloween, we're not just keeping ghosts away, we're honoring that old, delicate compromise between faith and folklore, light and shadow, heaven and hearth. It's the middle ground humanity always seems to find, where belief and fear meet in the flicker of a single flame. There's a reason Halloween doesn't belong to spring or summer. It belongs here, in autumn, when the world itself seems to be falling asleep. The harvest is the earth's last exhale before winter. Fields stand bare, smoke curls from chimneys, and for a brief moment, everything feels balanced. Life and death, warmth and cold, abundance and loss. It's no wonder people felt the veil thin during this season. The world was changing right in front of them. Long before Halloween, ancient cultures held harvest festivals that mixed gratitude with superstition. The Romans celebrated Pomona, the goddess of fruit and trees, offering apples and nuts to ensure next year's fertility. Her symbols, apples bobbing in water, still survive in modern Halloween games. The Celts mark the end of the light half of the year with Samhain. They believed that as the crops withered and daylight faded, the barrier between the worlds weakened. A time when spirits could walk and mortals could glimpse beyond. And in the east, during Chuseok in Korea or Tsukimi in Japan, people honored ancestors under the full harvest moon, sharing food and stories to remind the dead they were still remembered. Across continents, the same pattern repeats. As the earth dies, humanity remembers its dead. Even the moon plays its part. The harvest moon, low and golden, was both guide and omen. Its light helped farmers gather crops late into the night, but to others it looked like a celestial candle, a soft reminder that the heavens, too, were keeping watch. In folk tales, a full autumn moon could foretell strange things, a restless spirit, a love confession, a coming storm. People swore the moonlight made animals act oddly, and that dreams, under its glow, came true, for better or worse. And then there were the lanterns, symbols of the season's heartbeat. Before pumpkins, there were turnips, beets, and gourds, carved with faces and lit from within. In Ireland and Scotland, these jack-o'-lanterns were said to trap wicked spirits, especially the ghost of a man named Stingy Jack, a trickster too clever for both heaven and hell. He roamed the earth with only a coal ember in a carved-out turnip for light. A cursed wanderer, a warning, a story that glowed in every window. But beyond myth, the lantern served a simpler purpose, to hold light when the world darkened. there's something profoundly human about that. Whether it's a pumpkin on a porch, a candle in a cathedral, or a phone screen glowing in the dark, we're still doing the same thing. We're still making small suns against the night. So when you step outside on an October evening and the air smells of wood smoke and leaves, pause for a moment, look at the moon, round, calm, timeless. Think of every person across history who's done the same, wondering about the same things. Where do we go when the light fades? Who watches while we sleep? You may not hear an answer, but the silence itself is ancient. Before Halloween was about costumes and candy, it was about mischief, not the cruel kind, the playful sort that let people turn the world upside down for one night. Rules loosened, hierarchies blurred, and for a few precious hours, everyone, from peasants to nobles, could laugh at the order of things. Halloween wasn't just the night of the dead, it was the night of the living pretending to be dead, of tricksters and storytellers, of a humanity so weary from structure that it needed one evening of beautiful nonsense. The tradition of masking began centuries before. In Celtic lands, villagers disguised themselves as spirits or animals, hoping to confuse any real ghosts wandering near. They called it gwising, a patchwork of fur, soot, and stitched cloth, primitive costumes that made the night safer, because if the spirits came looking for you, you wanted them to mistake you for one of their own. But soon, gwising became more than protection. It became performance. People discovered that when they covered their faces, they could do things they couldn't by daylight. They could sing bardy songs, play jokes on their neighbors, mock the rich, flirt without consequence, or even ask the lord of the manor for ale and get it. Masks made everyone equal, and in a world built on rank and obedience, that was revolutionary. By the Middle Ages, Halloween had become the season of mumming and souling. Groups of performers wandered from house to house, offering prayers, songs, or short comedic plays in exchange for food or drink. It was theatre for the people, raw, chaotic, full of laughter, and always done in disguise. Imagine the flicker of firelight on rough wooden masks, voices rising over the wind, and a handful of coins or cakes passed from hand to hand. That sound, that warmth, was the heartbeat of Halloween. Over time, the mischief grew. By the 18th and 19th centuries, in parts of Ireland, Scotland, and later the US, Halloween was notorious for pranks. Gates were unhinged and carried away. Carts appeared on rooftops. Outhouses mysteriously migrated to front yards. It wasn't malice. It was ritualized chaos, a way to mock authority without truly breaking it, to remind the powerful that, for one night, control belonged to the crowd. Scholars still debate whether these pranks were pagan remnants or simply youthful rebellion, but perhaps both are true. Halloween has always been the safety valve for society's pressure, a time to let the chaos breathe. Then came the games, strange, silly, and often filled with surprising symbolism. Apple bobbing, for example, descended from ancient fertility rites tied to the Roman goddess Pomona. The floating apples were said to represent fate, the one you caught foretold your romantic future. Blindfolded bread-biting contests, candle races, fortune-telling by egg whites, by mirrors, by shadows. One particularly haunting tradition asked a young woman to walk backward down the stairs at midnight, holding a candle and a mirror. If she was lucky, she'd glimpse her future husband. If unlucky, she'd see something else. People didn't see these rituals as games, but as bridges between the visible and invisible. Laughter, fear, and desire all tangled together in the same breath. Halloween, for centuries, was less about the supernatural and more about the human need to flirt with it, to ask questions of fate, to dance with fear, to feel alive in the face of death's quiet patience. And though our masks today are made of plastic instead of soot, the impulse is the same. We still play, we still pretend, we still want to know what waits on the other side of the night. When Halloween crossed the Atlantic, it changed shape, just like the people who carried it. The Irish and Scottish immigrants who arrived in 19th century America brought with them the stories, the songs, and the flickering turnip lanterns of their homeland. But America, vast and fertile, offered a new canvas and new produce. Turnips were hard to carve. Pumpkins, round, bright, and plentiful, were perfect. And so the American pumpkin became Halloween's golden symbol, the flickering grin of jack-o'-lantern, once grim and gothic, turned playful, even friendly, a guardian spirit turned cartoon. By the late 1800s, American towns were rediscovering Halloween as a community celebration. Parades, parodies, barn dances, and bonfires replaced old fears. The focus shifted from spirits to stories, from death to delight. Newspapers of the era encouraged safe pranks and home parties. Magazines published guides for spooky but proper gatherings. And by the 1920s, Halloween had become the first truly modern holiday, half magic, half marketing. Candy, surprisingly, came late. Before the 1950s, children might receive apples, nuts, popcorn balls, or coins. It was only after World War II, with sugar rationing lifted and candy companies eager for a seasonal market, that the modern trick-or-treat boom began. The phrase itself, trick or treat, appeared in the 1930s, a playful negotiation between mischief and manners. Give us sweets or we'll play a trick. It was part threat, part game, and completely American. By mid-century, Halloween was no longer just an echo of pagan or Christian festivals. It was pop culture incarnate, television specials, costume parades, neighborhood lights glowing like constellations. Ghosts turned friendly, witches became glamorous, and for one night each year, every suburban street became a new kind of ritual ground, where doorbells replaced church bells, and the sacred act of offering transformed into bowls of chocolate. But under the bright wrappers and the laughter, the heart of Halloween never changed. It still celebrated what every culture, from Babylon to Boston, has always known: that darkness is not the enemy, only a mirror. Children with painted faces, parents on porches with mugs of cider, pumpkins glowing on steps like small suns. They're all part of an ancient lineage, a lineage that began when a frightened villager lit a single fire to keep the shadows away. And maybe that's the quiet genius of Halloween's reinvention, that it managed to turn fear into something communal, death into something decorative, and mystery into an annual act of shared imagination. The masks and candy may change, but the ritual remains. We gather, we light the dark, and for one night we remember that the unknown can also be kind. Every tradition that crosses an ocean changes shape. It carries what it can: faith, songs, recipes, but something always gets lost along the way. Halloween was no different. When Irish and Scottish immigrants came to North America in the 1800s, they brought a harvest's worth of stories in their pockets. But what they found here, wide fields, open skies, and a restless new world, changed those stories forever. Imagine stepping off a ship after weeks at sea, the smell of salt still clinging to your clothes. You've left famine, war, and landlords behind. Ahead lies America, vast, loud, untested, and somewhere in that unknown, you still want a piece of home. So you light a candle, not in a cathedral, not on a hillside in Donegal, but in a cabin window in Boston or New York or Chicago. A small flame to say, we're still here, we still remember. Those candles meant different things to different people. For some, they were prayers for the departed, the same flickers of All Souls' daylight that once glowed across Irish hillsides. For others, they became symbols of welcome, a signal to lost travelers, living or dead, that they would not be turned away. Over time, the gesture spread beyond Irish homes. Neighbors noticed, children asked questions, and soon the whole community began lighting windows on Halloween night, not from fear, but from warmth. A gentle transformation had begun. As Halloween settled into its new American form, immigrant customs wove together like threads in a quilt. German harvest festivals brought lantern parades. English Guy Fawkes celebrations contributed fireworks and mischief. Scottish guising gave birth to costumed door-to-door visits, and Irish jack-o'-lanterns, reborn in American soil as pumpkins, became the beating heart of it all. Each culture added a verse, and America sang the chorus. The beauty of immigrant traditions is that they rarely stay still. They adapt, they borrow, they bloom in unfamiliar soil. And that's exactly what Halloween did. From rural bonfires to city porches, from pagan ritual to neighborhood joy, it became the immigrant holiday, a mirror of what America itself was becoming. A land stitched together from old worlds, still haunted, still hopeful. Even now, if you walk through an old neighborhood on Halloween night, you might see candles flickering in windows between the electric lights. They don't just glow for decoration, they glow for memory, a whisper of all the souls who crossed water and time, bringing their stories with them. The souls who, in their quiet way, build the world we live in. It's an odd truth about humans. We chase the very thing we fear. We turn ghosts into bedtime stories. We pay money to scream in haunted houses. We whisper about the dark right before we close our eyes. Why? Because fear in small doses feels like life. Neuroscientists have a name for it: benign masochism, the pleasure of safe discomfort. When you watch a horror movie or hear a ghost story, your body reacts as if danger is real. Adrenaline surges, your pulse quickens, your senses sharpen, but your mind knows you're safe. That combination, fear without consequence, is a rush. It's why children laugh after a jump scare, and why adults tell each other ghost stories even when they claim not to believe. In medieval Europe, monks wrote that fear purified the soul. A trembling heart, they said, reminded you that you were alive, that you still had something to lose, and therefore something to cherish. And maybe that's why people found comfort in the macabre. In a world filled with plague, war, and famine, telling scary stories wasn't an indulgence. It was therapy. You controlled the fear by giving it a name. You turned chaos into narrative. You made peace with the dark by describing it. Halloween, in that sense, isn't just a festival of fright. It's an ancient form of emotional hygiene. The candles, the masks, the laughter, they all create a space where fear can breathe without poisoning us, where death can be acknowledged without despair. Even now, psychologists say the ritual of Halloween helps children process fear in a healthy way. By dressing as what scares them, a monster made small enough to wear becomes less powerful. It's exposure therapy with candy. And for adults, it's a chance to remember that fear isn't the opposite of comfort. It's part of it, because what is comfort if not the gentle relief that comes after a shiver? When the fire crackles and the wind sighs, when your heartbeat slows again, you feel it. The exquisite balance of being safe within the storm. That's the magic Halloween has always carried. Not horror, but harmony. Maybe that's why bedtime stories about ghosts feel so soothing, because they speak to the oldest truth of all, that every shadow contains a little light, and every dream, even the frightening ones, reminds us that we're still here to dream at all. Something changes in the world after midnight. The air feels heavier, the silence deeper, the shadows almost alive. It's the time when even the bravest souls think twice before crossing a dark hallway. And yet, for thousands of years, this has also been the hour when people claimed to feel closest to the divine. Midnight is not just a time, it's a border. The ancient Romans called it media nox, the middle of the night, and believed that dreams after this hour carried messages. The Greeks agreed, believing the god Morpheus sculpted dreams in the quietest part of the night, when even the stars seemed to listen. In Egypt, priests of the temples kept midnight vigils, chanting softly while incense curled toward the sky, believing that the spirits of gods walked the earth in those hours, watching over sleepers like invisible guardians. During the Middle Ages, when nights were long and homes were dimly lit by the faint orange glow of embers, people rarely slept in one stretch. They practiced what historians now call segmented sleep. They would rest for 4 or 5 hours, the first sleep, then wake around midnight to pray, think, make love, tend fires, or write in silence, before drifting again into a second sleep until dawn. That waking interval, that breath between worlds, was often described as strangely peaceful, the mind clear, the body still, a liminal moment between reason and dream. Monks called it the hour of grace. Scholars wrote by candlelight. Poets dreamed awake, and some believed that in that quiet space they could hear the voices of their ancestors, or perhaps their own truest thoughts. Today, science tells us that waking briefly at night isn't unnatural, it's ancient. Our bodies remember what our ancestors once did, but we, with our electric light and endless noise, no longer hear the silence they lived with. Yet, every now and then, when you wake at 2 a.m. for no reason, and the house is utterly still, you can almost feel that old rhythm stirring, the quiet pulse of history beating under your skin. You're not awake by accident. You're awake because the night wants to speak to you. Sleep researchers say dreams near morning are the most vivid, filled with emotion, color, and metaphor. The brain loosens its grip on logic, letting thoughts flow like rivers rather than roads. And in that fluid world, your mind becomes an artist. It paints memory as symbol, fear as story, and longing as landscape. In ancient dream temples, such moments were considered divine encounters. Today, we call them REM cycles. Different names, same mystery. So, if you wake in the middle of the night, don't curse the interruption. Listen, that quiet might be the same one monks prayed into 1,000 years ago. It might be the whisper of your own mind, reaching out to remind you that rest isn't always silence. Sometimes it's communion. As the long night of Halloween draws to a close, the laughter dies down, the candles burn low, and the world feels strangely still. It's easy to forget, beneath all the candy and costumes, that Halloween began as something deeply tender, a night not of horror, but of remembering. The Celts burned fires to guide souls. The Christians lit candles to honor the dead, and through centuries of fear, laughter, and transformation, Halloween has always circled back to the same truth, that memory is a kind of light. When you light a pumpkin on your doorstep, you're not just decorating, you're keeping an ancient promise, a promise whispered by farmers, monks, mothers, and wanderers alike, that the dead are not gone as long as we remember them. Even now, our rituals echo that old vow. We keep photos on mantles. We speak names aloud. We keep stories alive. Every remember when is a prayer in disguise. And maybe that's why Halloween feels so strangely emotional, because it isn't really about death. It's about the persistence of love. Somewhere tonight, a child will fall asleep beside a carved pumpkin, its glow flickering on their blanket. They'll dream of something soft and strange, not frightening, but full of color, the warmth of a world that keeps turning, the hum of stories that never die. Outside, a single candle burns in a window, Its light trembles, steady but fragile, like memory, like hope, like us. And now, as you rest your head, breathe in the night. Let the stories settle behind your eyes like starlight. The past is still here, not as ghosts, but as echoes. Every breath you take carries the air of every age before you. The monks who prayed, the peasants who sang, the dreamers who waited for dawn. They are all part of your sleep now, so close your eyes. The fire is low, the candle nearly gone, and outside, the wind carries what's left of the old songs. History is still humming, and you are safe to dream inside it.